We are live.
Uh-oh. Hi. Okay. Well, we hope that everything works perfectly and tech loves us today, right?
I'm sure we're going to encounter some challenges. It's been a while since I've been here, but yes.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. And if not, I'm sure that people are forgiving enough and happy enough to see us anyway. I am very happy to see you in a webinar. And I think, wait 1 second. Tech is already failing. Tech is already failing on my end. Juana, so great to actually have a webinar together. And thank you for taking time. Thank you for all the support in building this up. And I'm really, really happy that we managed to get out a webinar on the topic of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equality, equity. I think it couldn't come at a better time, especially with International Women's Day just behind us. I think there are a lot of hot topics coming on the back of that as well. Before we go any further, maybe we give ourselves a tiny bit of space to introduce ourselves to the audience. I know we have a mixed audience today, so would you help me with that?
For sure. And long overdue, to be honest. And I'm very excited about traveling back to Berlin in a couple of weeks to see you live there. We'll talk more about that. But hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know, what day is it today? Is it Tuesday today? I don't even know, right?
It
Tuesday,
is
because I have
Tuesday.
my Spanish classes on Tuesdays.
Okay.
My name is Juana Iordechescu. I am the founder of Feral Cultures, which is a consultancy dealing with trainings and inclusive leadership. But specifically, what is coming up for us is a very interesting conference specialized on workplace inclusion. My background is very much like Andrea's in talent acquisition, about 15 years in a couple of different countries and types of companies. But somehow I ended up building more and more here on LinkedIn and in different countries and cities, and I feel like I'm just talent at this point. I don't even think it's just TA or DEI. It's just a lot to do with everything around talent management, talent inclusion. When you don't find me doing that, you'll find me hiking and maybe going out with some friends. This is basically my life now.
Well, I envy you for your life in Barcelona. Honestly, I think for a lot of us who know you from the past days you were in Berlin, or years you've spent in Berlin, right? A lot of us are considering. So stop tempting us,
Do
right?
consider it. It's awesome.
Yes, thank you for the advertising. Thank you for being here. I think you've not rang the bells around the conference enough, because I think it is the only one of its kind in Europe. And honestly, I can't wait to join you in May and be there. It's very funny because you're coming to do the event with Talent Crunch in April, and then I come over as a Talent Crunch founder in May for your conference. So I am super happy to be able to join, because I think it is essential, and there is nothing like it. So don't underplay it. I think it's a tremendous achievement and a wonderful thing that you've been building for the last 2 years now, right? It's the second edition.
It's the second edition. And again, we're doing this on the FAIR platform. So those who have been kind of attending some of these FAIR dialogues, they know. But for those who don't know, I just want to emphasize a little bit what you mentioned, Andrea, that it's unique. We're trying to put together policymakers. So all these folks which are working on different legislative pieces that we need to comply by in order not to get fined, but also do the right thing. But then also all the talent and DEI practitioners and academia and research. So that's why for me, it's somehow the joy and pain, let's say so, in the same time, because we always have this siloed environment. So we're trying to put it together, and hopefully by this conversation as well, bring some insights of at least what I've learned in the past couple of years from these type of actors, right?
Yeah, I don't want to sing your praises because people will think I'm sponsored.
And
I'm
we
not,
can
but
carry on with the conversation because we have a lot to cover.
It's true. We have a lot to cover. So before going any further, one thing I would like to encourage everyone joining, before I tell you a little bit about who I am and why my face is here now, is get a pen, get paper, because we actually want to do this as educational as we can. So there might be moments in time where you will think, even though if this is recorded, right, it stays online, what goes on the internet never goes away, but you may want to take some notes. Now, I am Andrea. I am the founder of Talent Crunch Berlin. This is a community people have gotten to know and love. It is probably one of the fastest growing communities in the DACH region. It's focused on talent everything. We originally started as talent acquisition because that's my background. Similarly to Juana, I've spent 15 years in talent acquisition, primarily as a lot of them spent as a principal, meaning that I never left the ground into the management world. I always stayed close to the with my fingers on the pulse, let's say. And in 2023, launched Talent Crunch, and that is in parallel with my consulting arm, where through which I support organizations and individuals alike on all topics talent. So we are not very, very different, me and Juana. We're just in different places, and I think the focus is slightly different in some areas, but we complement each other quite well.
And fun fact, we are both Romanians. And
I should have put my full name there because people would have guessed. Yes.
that's cool. And we actually used to work together twice. So
yes, that's also true. Juana was my boss at Wayfair. I think she got me over to Wayfair, actually. So thanks. Okay, but cutting through the noise, you know what I want to talk about? Because what we said is, okay, this conversation today is going to be moving beyond optics, right? It's all nice and fluffy, and it's cool to talk about diversity, about inclusion, about all of these things. But
it's not cool anymore. So in some
yeah,
areas.
okay.
Yeah, I'm in a mood today. Carry on.
Okay. If I was to ask you, what is diversity? What do we mean? And this is where I get my pen out. I'm listening to you talk because my observation is we tend to pigeonhole the gender topic and completely forget everything else, which is supremely important.
First of all, a disclaimer here. I am not a purist in terms of, how do we define DEI, DEIB, DENI. I think all different markets have their different reasons of why they reach a certain nomenclature. I think it's very important to stay very fluid and flexible. We started with anti-discrimination. That was the whole thing at the beginning of times, let's say in the 70s and 80s, when the corporate world started realizing that we kind of need to do something because we have a lot of people who could work, but we don't want them to work, almost like certain imagine you have the all women after the Second World War starting to get rights, starting to be a little bit more present in the economical life versus just motherhood or this type of roles, and banks would still not hire them, or they would hire them as just secretary, etc., right? So then we got a little bit of extra trainings and legislation around, women should be everywhere. And I think this is where this thread maintains, because it was one of the biggest demographics that was visibly absent from the workforce for a very, very long time. But now, when we say diversity in general, we think representation. Do we have in our workforce the actual population, the actual demographics in our society represented in the workplace? And in each country, and especially in the European Union, we have protected categories, protected demographics. And here you have women with an asterisk, a very strong asterisk on mothers, because this is where a lot of the discrimination was happening. You actually, in the 80s, you could get fired legally if you were pregnant. So we've come a long way.
True.
But then we have, yes, exactly, win. But then we have disability, of course. I think, again, we have disability acts in most of the countries, and there are very specific requirements from organizations and other type of institutions. Then we have a lot of demographics that in the US, you have the racial dimension, right? African American population, but in Europe is a little bit different. In Romania, where we're from, for example, we have a lot of legislation around Roma community, because that was traditionally the most excluded ethnical, minority. In France, you have a lot of people from North Africa, etc., right? So I think we need to think representation. What does that mean for my country, for my region, for my legislation, and maybe my industry? Sometimes industries are a little bit funky. But then we also talk about equal access to opportunity, right? It could be considering these demographics or other socioeconomical backgrounds, age,
Mm.
a lot of different items, right? And then now we are in this modern part of diversity, which also says, hey, if people feel included, they will give 100%. So we will have engagement, we will have high productivity, we will have people who walk the talk in terms of representing the brand. It's not just come to work and, kind of contribute.
Mm.
um, and then you have the equity part, which is more like, are you paid fairly? Do you have access to the
Yes.
same time of learning development? So it's gotten a little bit big. FAIR could be an acronym that you might want to use moving forward, because there is a very interesting, and Lily Zhang, for those more familiar with her work, I didn't coin it. I thought about it, my FAIR, but I didn't coin it. But she says fairness, access, inclusion, and representation. Do you have
Mm-hmm.
people representing all the fields, and are they treated fairly? A little bit. That's kind of how we need to look at it. Sorry, it was a bit longer, but
No, I love it. I think it is important to set this because I think we come from all walks of life. We come from different privileges. We come from different organizations, educational backgrounds. We are all here extremely different. I know the composition of my community is very diverse, which I love, and I am pretty sure that our understanding benefits from having, let's say, a base level established at the beginning of this conversation. And there are some more conversations to be had in the next couple of months. So I think it is important to have a base level. And you did mention the representation quite a lot. And one of the things we talked about, the two of us in the past, right? There was something quite important in relation to, okay, but are there some tangible steps for moving beyond what we have all seen, maybe not called out, but we have all seen performative DEI efforts, right? Are there things that you would be open with sharing with us today, stages of what DEI maturity could look like?
so the DA maturity model is a 5-step model that can
Mm.
help anybody figure out very quickly. You can do it by yourself, you can call me, but still, it's you can even just do it mentally now if you're listening to us. So we have this first step, which is more aware. Am I aware that there are regulation? Am I aware that we do have, certain demographics not represented in our organization? Am I aware maybe of even certain behaviors that are not necessarily helping people feel included? Do I have this understanding that this could be a reality that impacts the productivity of my organization, and let's say it's also maybe a bit of social impact? Then we have the
Mm.
second step, which is compliant. All your HR folks have a very strict list of, of things they need to declare on a yearly basis. They could be a
Yes.
minimum, and they could be also, do more, go beyond. And I know HR, like CHROs who do just the bare minimum, and I know CHROs which like go all the way out. But that's basically the letter of the law. And for this, for example, I know many organizations who say we are inclusive, and no matter, they have the disclaimer, they have the thing on the job profile. But each country in the European Union has a legislation that requires organizations to prove that they hire a minimum of 2, and I think a maximum of 5% of people with disabilities.
Yeah.
You know what most organizations do? They don't do that, but they pay a fine.
They pay the fine. Yes. Yeah.
It's a given. It's not even like we try, right? It's
Yeah.
hard for sure. Because in Germany, for example, I tried to solve this a little bit for our previous employer, which is not in Germany anymore, so maybe I'm a bit more comfortable to talk about that. But it's a very difficult process, and you need to give yourself time, and most organizations don't give themselves time, and they prefer to pay the 100K up to 500,000 sometimes, so that's an example where we don't do what we say we do.
Mm-hmm. That's performative. Yeah.
Yes, very much.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, nobody will know. That's also the thing. There is
Yeah.
no transparency in a lot of these things because the
Mm.
law doesn't require you to do that. So if you don't have an ERG that requires for these details, or if you don't have the social kind of, if you have a union or a lawsuit or anything like that, you will never know how many things are performative.
Yeah.
But then I think most of the organization, at least that I work with, they are in this tactical area where
Mm.
they've overcome that, and there are some initiatives, and not just for hiring but business in general, right? Maybe supplier diversity, for example, is a business initiatives when it comes to diversity, and those are more like initiatives in pockets. They are isolated and they're not necessarily part of a bigger strategy. Then you have the fourth, which is rare, which is more integrated, which means you have a roadmap that is not just for the talent department, it's for the entire organization. How do we make ethical decisions around our product and services? How do we serve our users? How is the accessibility of our products, etc., etc., etc.? And then you have the more sustainable, where technically you start also giving back to society in a way. So
Okay.
showcasing best in class type of DEI initiatives and strategies, and being able to teach others about how you do things, and maybe just lifting the entire ecosystem.
Gotcha. I love that this teaching part. Honestly, nobody was stopped before from preaching and teaching, even if they are not even at level 3, I would imagine. But I like I think the level 4 is something that the organizations today should, at least that, right? They should aim for. One thing was employee, right?
Mhm.
The employee resource groups.
Yeah.
Are these, in your opinion, would they be in the tactical part or more towards the integrated part? Where do you usually see them?
Unfortunately, tactical, just because I would see them in integrated when they would have actual budgets, an actual
Okay.
governance structure, right?
Mm.
And they can talk to the C level, they have access and transparency to maybe a bigger part of the strategy. That's when I see them a little bit there. I think, for example, at the conference we would have Megan Cad, no advertising per se, but I love that she's actually somebody who is taking care of 7 different ERGs. That's her full-time job. To
Mm.
create that budget, that buy-in, that governance, that significant input, not just in employee experience type of opinions and insights, but into
Mm-hmm.
what is Gartner doing as a whole in terms of, for example, insights or reports or research that they do.
Oh, that's super interesting, and I think I would love to get all the learning over. And I think this is one thing I will definitely strive to do for the community, is get as much content and information over from the conference itself. Um, this is something, a conversation I had this morning actually with Sarah. You will meet her. She's the director from our next sponsor for the next diversity and inclusion event we have in April. And this is the ERG topic was big,
Mhm.
right? They had an entire e- an- let's call it an offsite, but it was more like an event around this topic. So I think some organizations are definitely going towards that integrate, or they aim for the integrated part in this space, but it's probably really difficult to get.
It's
And
very difficult because I
yes.
just short here. I think we
Mm.
need more education for ERG
Yes.
leaders. What is your purpose? I think we need more understanding from organizations that ERGs are not
Mm.
syndicates, because a lot of them are scared that, oh
Yes.
my God, we're gonna have, we're gonna, I don't know,
Yes.
it gets complicated. And I think in general, my experiences, and maybe Sarah Cordivano, which has quite a lot of work done on ERGs,
Mm.
um, it can move very quickly into a very emotional space versus problem solving space. And I think that's why the governance piece, like what is our agenda, what is our regularity, who are the
Yes.
people, what are we trying to solve, etc.
Mm-hmm. A lot of your work emphasizes empowering change makers within organizations, right? So we just mentioned some of these topics just now, but if you are to look at, this is going to be a bigger topic. We can break it down into smaller pieces, but if you are to look at reviewing three, let's say 3, 4, however many we can go through right now, system level changes, but looking at recruitment, promotions, policies, maybe we want to break them down piece by piece, but what would be these systemic changes we can champion in order to all of us in the different departments of talent or people and even beyond get on board and help build a truly inclusive workplace.
So what I'm gonna say is gonna sound simple, but it's not.
But we like simplification, and then we can go back to
And
our
then we
desks
can
with
go
our
into
little notes.
because I so I when I started Fair Cultures, but in general also through my work, I was one of those people who for 7 8 years was only focused on gender because that was the biggest, let's say, representation issue when it came to tech and the organizations that I used to work
Yes.
in, right? And I also felt also there was a lot of talk about lived experience, and there was a little bit of a, hey, if you don't have lived experience you shouldn't be working on this. And I think I was a bit naive and I was like, education can help in a lot of different ways. So I when I think about systemic, I actually even try to stay away from the labeling of these diversity dimensions and say, hey, my organization is focused on gender, age, and disability. I try to stay away from that because that can change. Maybe your organization has done his dues and moves to the second dimension and third and whatever. What I try to focus is on moments that matter, and what I mean by that
Okay.
is where can you have bias and discrimination, and where you will
Okay.
for sure have it almost. And that is it's actually even before the hiring, if before the recruitment process. It's that who do you attract in your pipeline?
Yes. Yeah, I have
Who
for
are
sure.
the candidates that view you as an employer of choice? And you know this very well, like we discussed so many times. People are trying to even just think, okay, I want to improve the representation of women in my organization, but I don't do any sourcing. I don't do any employer brand related to this new community that I haven't been able to tap in for maybe 20 years of actioning, right? So what do we do for the attract piece? How do we communicate? Which partnerships do we create? How do we kind of position ourselves, right? Versus doing the same thing over and over again. So the employer brand piece, I find it critical because you will not be able to get the benefits of getting people from minority to a bigger minority over a majority in some cases. And you will always kind of, work for nobody at the end of the day. For
You know, if
recruitment, yeah,
if you give
sorry.
me a quick second, I wanted to interject here with something because I remember in my past role, I had this experience, and I would even say even before that, right? So even before we get to the attraction piece, I think a lot of us in the talent acquisition space, or looking purely at the let's say talent acquisition, even before that, because we may look at building an attraction strategy which does focus on the right individuals you want to bring in the organization. We might be looking at an employer branding, but if we internally have not really looked already at audited, where do we stand right now? Right? I mean, this is really a really big topic to look
Yep.
into. But I would go even before the attraction piece, I would go internally and look at where do we stand right now? What is lacking? What is risky? We can't just imagine that we attract and then we bring people in and set them up for failure. I'm sure you will get to this point in a minute as well, but I didn't want to let this slide
Yep.
because I think a lot of us look at where do I need to go and forget to look at what already exists and how do we build where we want to go based on what we have already. I will not touch AI right now. I promise this is not the topic for AI. But okay, so you were mentioning you wanted to move on to the recruitment piece from the attract and EB.
But just coming back a bit there, like this is why that audit is important. Again, it can be a very
Yes.
simple, touch base, like what do we see, or you can do a proper audit to measure, to do some focus groups, do some surveys, do some benchmarking, and repeat that maybe a few times before you draw conclusions. But I think this is a little bit like to inform yourself where you
Yes.
have strengths, because you will have strengths, and where do you have maybe some blind spots, and we need to work on
Yeah.
that.
Mm.
Because not everybody needs. This is a bit probably the challenge. You cannot focus on everything at the same time. You just can't. I wish there would be a way, but resources are limited. Time is time. I am very much. I try to be very practical, even when we do these audits and we give like a course of action for the next 12 months. We always ask who's gonna do it, right? How
Yes.
committed are they gonna be? What type of budget can you put behind it? And based on those answers, we actually create the plan.
Of
Because,
course.
idealistic plans are just that literature, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, for the recruitment, you can definitely speak a lot here as well, right? Like the standardized interviewing process. It's such
Oh,
a gap in so many organizations. For those who have been in like maybe large corporate, this is a bit of a given, and maybe a few of you on the call will be like, "Yeah, but we do this for 10 years." But you would be surprised how this is missing in small and medium organizations. And where
yes.
do you think your current employees are coming from? If you're in big corp, they're coming from smaller places where they grew and they didn't have the best experiences, so maybe they're a bit cynical now and they ask you for more. Right, so
Oh, and they bring that experience and they don't maybe understand the importance or the necessity of
yeah,
having these structures in place.
yeah, calibration, like calibrate your interviewers, calibrate your hiring managers, calibrate your recruiters constantly, right? This is also a piece of information. Keep transparency for everybody. Where are candidates coming from? Are they applicants? Are they referrals? Referrals, for example, are a big skewing point when it comes to changing the makeup of your employee base. A lot of the startups, you kind of see people who look, talk, and walk the same. There's a reason for that. People bring other people, and that's okay. You can control it, but you need to be aware of it. So this kind of
Aware.
continuous check. And of course, now we can talk a little bit about AI, because a lot of candidates in today's market, especially with the current state of things, they are fearful that AI is rejecting them. And we've talked a lot
Yes.
how AI can be biased, and is, right, depending on the tools, depending on the level of decisions your AI can do. I in general, I try to keep people not so worried, because we're not there yet, but we will be.
I
Currently,
think we
AI
are
making decisions is not there. So
I think we are in Europe. I think we are a little bit too closer to the safer side, purely
yeah,
because of the EU AI Act, which prohibits such things. However, a tool or a system or a technology is just as good as the hands who are using it. So even though we say, okay, you will not be rejected by AI, which I truly hope stands true and correct, individuals, regardless of any factors, will be, let's say, rejected from a process by other individuals who may decide they will not take the time to even look through what the AI flagged as maybe not, and just say, "Ah, thank you. I have a slot. I have 20 bulk. I'm just no." If anyone has done that, please stop doing that. I don't know if we have to make this a public service announcement
that was the
in that
promise of
regard.
the vendors who sold those tools, right? Like, hey, we're
Yes.
gonna save you time and brain power from making these decisions. It is a dangerous space,
Mm,
but it will, and I don't think we will have the grace to not mess it up. We will mess it up probably for a few years, because before we do it right, to be honest, even there.
mm. I don't want to steer away. I want to
Yeah,
go back to the
we can
original
go back
question,
to those.
which was a big question, right? So
Yeah.
systemic changes, three, four things that we should definitely look at, and we definitely veered into this AI topic, which is
Yes.
I want to come back to because I do have a specific thing to discuss with you about this. But if we go back, so we looked at
Let me go back.
attraction, we even looked at the auditing piece, which is,
Yeah.
in my opinion, absolutely essential. If you don't understand where you stand, as you well mentioned, and then understand who is going to do whatever you would like to do,
Yeah.
then you have the recruitment piece. Yes, I could talk about that quite extensively. What other things, big lifts, have you seen, or would you recommend that individuals look into, organizations?
Let me start with a small lift, which is
Okay.
compensation equity, pay transparency, pay equality. We have so much work to do there. One, for those building your compensation policies, again, I am fearful. For example, small and medium companies, they sometimes, well, I feel it's about 80% of the case, they use an external provider. If that external provider doesn't give you the right benchmarks and the right kind of control system, you will be highly dependent and probably error prone. In internal organizations, especially if they're bigger, there are so many things that happen at the negotiation stage, but also who gets promoted influences your overall pay equity. So there are so many things that you could do there, but I would just suggest a regular pay audit. And it will be normal if you work in compensation and benefit or talent to have a 3 to 5% kind of pay inequity for unadjusted rates. That can be solved in time. But if you have more than that, you have a problem. And if you
Okay.
again have more than that specifically for certain demographics, let's say, yeah, your immigration, this happens a lot when, you're, let's say, even maybe, companies like booking.com, right? Very Dutch for 15 years. And then it starts recruiting from all over the world. And you have all this kind of migrant, highly skilled migrants, but they don't come from your regular universities. They don't have the same type of pedigree as your nationals. So you end up maybe placing them on the lower side of your brackets.
Yes.
You don't have a very strict policy, what you offer at start and what you offer in terms of promotion, it will go sideways. It's a given. So you need to correct. You constantly need to correct. Definitely removing salary requirements questions from the recruitment process. This is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to underpaying. Again, on the same reason, you will not have equivalent salaries not even between companies
Oh, don't tell me that the tech is
in the
failing
same
us.
region, even less than big
Okay. Juana, we lost you. I hope not for long, though. This is the beauty of tech, right? And waiting for Juana to come back, hopefully soon, because this stream is actually from the fair StreamYard. There is one thing that she just mentioned which surprised me, removing the question about salaries altogether in the recruitment processes. I'm very curious how many people in TA listening to this have actually done that or would even consider doing that. And I want to go back and question this a bit more. It does make sense because we already know that individuals from different groups would pitch themselves differently. So clearly, as a woman, I can share that for me, this is extremely difficult to pitch myself when it comes to money. And we know that, hello, I think she's back. Hi. It's fine. I was just talking about this last thing you said, which I find really interesting, right? I've been removing the question about the salary, right? From the interview process. I was just saying that for me as a woman, it's really hard to pitch myself, and it's really hard to say I want X amount of money. And we already know that there are different groups of individuals who would have less of an issue with that. But I'm curious of your, apart from trying to eliminate this piece, which I think it's quite straightforward, right? We want to try
Yeah.
to make it equal for everyone. Apart from that, what else would you say? Why else would this matter for creating equality in that at that step?
be honest, it also saves you a lot of time if you actually have standardized compensation bands,
Mm.
and you again can have a little bit of a, a steady place to do your benchmarks and your audits. Otherwise you will have to clean up all the time everything. Basically you will have 100 people in your organization and 100 of them being on completely different random
Ah,
things.
yes.
So I don't know if I can see you interrupted a little bit, but the standardized compensation bands, first of all, will save you the trouble to always have this conversation. Of course, you will have. That's why it's a band. You will have some wiggle room, but ultimately, no matter which demographic you're coming from, whether it's a confidence gap, whether it's your previous salary was actually really small and you would be happy with the lowest of the lowest, because you're just changing your complete life, is just not creating fairness. That fairness piece needs to be
Mm.
intrinsic in that decision part. And on top of the compensational bands, I think a lot of the things we miss, especially at the recruitment process, but related to performance, is to be transparent in the recruitment process around bonus and performance kind of raises. You kind of only find out the full detail at your first cycle. And
Yes.
there's little to do then, right?
Mm. I mean, if they don't ask you, but coming back to what you said, there is also I think there is this, when you flip a coin, right? It has two sides, because us avoiding asking this question, yes, may create a more inclusive and fairer process. However, it may also lead to heartbreak and a complete waste of time if we reach the end and then
Mm,
we find out that actually we cannot afford that individual. So maybe one thing I think about, and I hope it will come to fruition in Europe or in Germany in particular, is transparency on
yeah.
our salary bands.
So it is, the Pay Transparency Act is published, is active. The countries need to adopt it. Some countries, I think, if you follow Pavel from Indeed, who is the director of insights from Indeed, he publishes I think, every second day insights about pay transparency being done in Germany versus the UK versus France. So the UK is definitely leading the way when it comes to Europe,
Yeah.
Germany second, etc., etc. But I was here. I learned a very good practice. I was at Booking.com 2018, and we would not ask the salary expectations from people because it was irrelevant. To be honest, everybody was coming from all over the world. Um, some did their homework, some not. But we were like, "Hey, this is our range. Are you okay with that?"
Yes.
And no more
Yes.
heartbreak. Full transparency. It didn't need to have a law. Also, you
Yeah.
can do this because you want to
Yes.
be, an inclusive employer and a transparent employer.
Yes, provided that the company that you're hiring for has such ranges. And then going back to what you just said, please build them, right? But we also understand that, okay, you are a small startup, you have no idea, you're just going through it, or you're a small, really small organization. And then my encouragement for the individuals taking care of the recruitment piece is, you still need to pay these people something at the end of the day. Find out early on, before you start hiring for whatever
Mhm.
role you're hiring for, what that company affords to pay.
Yeah.
And then you're also able to discuss with the organization whether or not that pay is relevant for the market standard or not.
Yeah.
So because I am pretty sure that this raises a lot of it boils the blood, because I
Okay.
would imagine, as if I would be a recruiter, I'd be like, oh no, but I need to. So there are definitely ways around it. And it's an interesting thing that you brought up. Of course, we went again away from the main
I
topic.
I just want to make sure that, because we have some interesting comments. So just because they're related to the pay, I just want to read it for the others if they are not reading it. So we have Cassia who says, "I feel from my experience as a candidate, it reflects the context you are in. So when you kind of share your own expectation or your current salary, and not your capabilities," which is a very interesting perspective as well. I think it's super interesting to understand, hey, I'm running for a new role in a new organization. You need to pay me for what I'm going to do there, and kind of show me that
Yes.
transparency for the impact of that role there. So I think this is really nice. And then we have Victoria Savchenko, who's also contributing with, even if you have structured salary bands, I find it is important to ask for salary expectation at the application stage, as candidates may have expectations far outside your salary band, which was what you were saying. Like, how do you
Yes, yeah,
avoid
yeah.
that waste of time? So there is maybe a flip of a coin on that, and just putting the problem differently. Like, how can I
Yes.
save that time by sharing my bands?
Yeah, that's definitely it. I remember in practicing me recruiting, I would prefer the second option. I definitely ask people what they expect, but I prefer the
Mhm.
second option because it also limited my own waste of time, if I'm honest. And just being transparent and showing, okay, these are my cards, right?
Mhm.
I will give you something before I ask something of you. The mentality, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay, we had some. Do we still want to go on the topic of big, more like systemic changes, system level changes in
The big,
policies for
the big ones.
the yeah, anything you would want to add there? Because I have other things I want to go through with you.
And also feel free to add them, but I think there are two key. They could be again a few different ones, but if
Mm-hmm.
I want to focus, and if I have limited resources, I need to focus on promotion. So, do I
Okay.
have transparent promotion criteria clearly outlined? What are the skills? What are the, the achievements that I want to see from my people by functions, by role, by timing role, etc., etc.? Because you cannot have the same pretense from somebody onboarding in their first 3 to 6 months versus somebody in the same role 2, 3 years later. So I think there is a certain, I don't know how to call it, evolutionary view on performance per individual versus your roles and everything else. um, then also a bit of regular promotion audits. I think some of the biggest changes we were able to push in terms of looking deeper at fairness and inclusion and the diversity piece was when we realized that after a certain period of time, 2, 3 years, when we didn't review this promotion criteria, you would see that in general, it's not just women, it can be migrant, it can be basically any underrepresented category in your organization will always be a little bit behind, right? So what we've
Mm-hmm.
seen through some of these audits was like, it's not that, for example, women or people from migratory background were promoting less, kind of, they were promoting slower. So if that
Mm.
makes sense, a person from the majority group, you can, put in your mind whatever that majority group is in your organization, it would take them a year and a half maybe to promote, but for those from minority groups it would take them 2 years and a half, and that's impact on everything, right? So I think there are so many pieces of analysis that you could do, and then once you've had a good system and a good review of that system, so it doesn't stay the system moves, you can put it once in place, but you need to course correct.
Of course.
A lot of the good stuff that are coming in organizations in being able, as you are saying, to keep. So let's say you brought the people from diverse backgrounds in,
Mm-hmm.
well, and also want to keep them. There is that part of equity sometimes, right? So you need to create mentorship and sponsorship for everybody who's interested, but maybe a little bit tailored if you are just at the beginning for those underrepresented talent pools. Um, and
Mm.
one big thing, I'm just gonna say this, and I'm gonna let you, but I've realized, like, imagine everybody now who's listening. How is your promotion process happening? Do you raise your hand? Is your manager nominating you? Is a committee nominating you? That will fully influence how some categories are moving forward and some are not. Because I've seen all systems, and I think it's something very interesting to look at.
Oh God, yes. Oh yes. It reminds me of I was part of I was in the audience listening to a panel a while ago. I don't remember exactly the topic, but one of the things that was mentioned was, and this will frizzle some feathers in the audience as well. Somebody mentioned that they are a huge fan of calibrations. I know that
Mhm,
we both worked in minimum two organizations with calibration systems.
mhm.
And my question for that individual was, how do you, through calibrations that you say they're so fair and they're so just, how do you um, take into account individuals with neurodivergency?
First, education, right? So I think this is, to be honest, a bigger topic in the past 2 years or 3 years than ever before. I
Luckily.
luckily I don't
Mm.
necessarily specialize on that, and usually when we have projects we pull other specialists in, and I was actually talking to one of them living in Belgium a few weeks ago, and they were doing some works with organizations to educate their populations around what does it mean, how do we kind of support employees, but also how do we not tiptoe around the topic, right, and like let's implement it in our processes. And I think their feedback was, hey, everything seems very surface level at this point
Yeah.
in organizations. Personally, and maybe you can share your perspective here because you even wrote a piece now recently on this, and I think it's very interesting to kind of start sharing more. There is so much information that is unknown in the general knowledge of neurodiversity. So when it reaches an organizational level and how do we deal with people in work setup, there is a big slowness, but there's also a big reticence of, hey, am I going to
Yes.
do it wrong? Right?
Yes. For sure, and I think there are so many factors, and I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
let's say redirect the conversation in that topic, but that I do notice. So, for example, if I look at the community at Talent Crunch, right, and the diversity of individuals we have represented in this community, for which I'm really grateful because it's such a wonderful mix, and when speaking to them one on one in various contexts and what they experience in their organizations, the lack of knowledge,
Hmm.
and sadly sometimes the lack of interest in acquiring the knowledge is something that it was really saddening for me. I wouldn't say shocking. And then you have the layer that comes on top, where they're just in a bubble together, is the cultural aspect of things. I don't know if, for example, a country such as the Netherlands, which in my opinion is really quite advanced and fast
Hmm.
and embraces risk, embraces change. The same for the UK. I don't
Hmm.
know if there the discussion would look slightly different versus here, where I'm in Germany, right, where we really have we are quite standoffish. We are
Hmm.
quite afraid of touching these. They're like mercury, right? They are so volatile for some reason. So I don't know if part of the lack of understanding also stems from where we are on the planet, and how that how the cultural appropriation affects that. I don't
Yes.
know. I assume that that is
I think your
a
assumption is
factor.
correct. And for those who want to go deeper in this, so I try to I try to also think like what is inclusive by design, right?
Mm,
So, for example, in performance evaluation, a lot of even Workday and big systems now, they're trying to help you write fair text. So basically, like imagine
make
I've
it
seen
make sense.
I've seen some audits where they were like, hey, let's take all these performance evaluations for, I don't know, let's say your engineering managers or your sales folks, right? And
Mm,
let's see if there is any bias in how we write as individuals. Like me, I need to go and, do a review for you, Andrea. And I'm going to use these adjectives versus I'm going to use these other adjectives for this other type of population, and the differences are quite high. So this is where, for example, Textio
mm,
started for recruitment, and now you see the same tools being like used and implemented. They're not changing your performance, but they're flagging things, and you have some nudges, right? And then your big
mm-hmm,
auditors of HR performance systems, they will say, hey, the women in this organization are recurrently characterized as I don't know, in a certain ways versus the men, or people again from migrant or people of a certain age. And now we have all the not Gen Z, Gen Z conversation. Like, how are we characterizing and using language? And I think when it comes to neurodiversity, is a little bit the same. We just don't have like
mm,
not everybody, and actually very few have the vocabulary. And I think we just need to invest
yes.
a bit more there before.
It's very interesting. I wasn't aware of this, so thank you for mentioning it. And I love the fact that now we are checking for bias more. If I think back to recruitment, we do these unbiased training. We all love it, or we say we do, and now we are pushing this towards performance management and talent development, talent management. I want to ask you in relation to this, the bias topic, right? So exploring the role of bias audits in general. What would you how would you look at this in relation to the job design? I'm not referring here to the job description.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then
mhm,
you
mhm,
mentioned performance already, but what about equitable onboarding processes?
mhm. I so onboarding are such a interesting topic, and I know some onboarding specialists, and they have very strong opinion. But usually, what I've seen them struggle with was the lack of buy-in from the organization to do something more complex. Onboarding tends to focus on functional needs, which is which tools to use, how is the org, maybe a little bit about values, right? And that's about it.
There's
It
usually a
doesn't.
one pager for that.
I mean, it is what it is, right? And I think
Yeah.
the onboarding is a missed opportunity in general to create more awareness. I've seen so many organizations who actually do really well, but your employees only find out, 2 years later, once they spend enough time in the organization, when you could teach them from day one what are the key factors for your organization to be inclusive and kind of focusing on this in the right ways. I forgot what was the question, but I think
What could we do if we go beyond the mystics of it? Are there some things that you
Hmm.
notice that you work with customers with, or we just through your own experience so far in the onboarding? Let's look at onboarding. Things that we could do to avoid the biases, to increase this inclusivity that you just mentioned. Some two, three things that you would remember straight away.
So this is a bit linked also with everything learning and development. Do we offer because this is a moment of learning, the onboarding, right? It's like acquiring
Yeah.
knowledge. Things are given to you, and we create one single shape. So I think there is a lot of conversation, for example, now on dyslexia, and some people cannot focus on watching those videos for 3 days in a row, but they love reading documents.
Yeah.
That's for me, it's an easy one, right? Like, I mean, it requires some
Yes.
time and some effort, but I think we need multiple format in ways in which we need to access information, especially critical
Yes.
information for us to do our jobs correctly and maybe overperform or. So I think a lot of people are undermined by not having this type of offering at the beginning. Certain organizations do, certain don't. So I think that's easy. And there is, to be honest, a lot of I would love to have the opportunity to create programs that actually speak about employee rights in the onboarding. There are,
Yes.
right? Because again, we see a lot of stuff around the unlawful dismissal. We see a lot of issues like around harassments, and people don't know where to go, and they wait too long, and then there's nothing to be done. Now we have again legislation around whistleblower. So if you see some wrongdoing against your users or your colleagues, there is an anonymized line that is not necessarily going to the organization, but they're outside bodies authorized to look into these queries, and you could estimate they're more objective, right? So I would also use the onboarding one for like, how do I prepare the sharing of this knowledge that is critical for me to do my job, but also what are my rights as an employee? I think this is a big missing part.
Would I will assume that people will default to yes, but they should read the HR policies, especially on the second part. However, do your HR policies even include that?
I mean, I've actually worked with a client last year, and we revised their code of conduct. So we basically did the 60-page thing that nobody wants to read.
Yeah.
um, in smaller chunks, in again things that are some in video, some in written, and they also have inclusive language. So you're not, you don't want to not read them when you start reading them because you're annoyed or frustrated by he everywhere, for example. This happens a lot. This is the reality.
I know. I signed an employment contract where I was constantly named he.
So there are ways for sure.
Yeah. And the second, I know we had some comments, but I cannot see
Yes.
them on my end. If would you like to address some of
Do
them?
you see, because I think this is basically I shared one here. Do you see when I share on the screen now?
This one I do see. There was
Okay. Perfect.
a bigger
Yes.
comment before which I saw,
Let's
and then
bring
we lost it.
Rina
Yes,
because
from
it was
Rena. Hmm. So,
I have
okay.
thoughts.
Oh, oh yes, I'm here for it.
I mean, I don't have a lot of. We've done some programs, but I would encourage anybody struggling with this to actually go and check Tech Returners. This is an organization that was actually recently sold to a bigger organization, but it was started in the UK and they had quite a lot of success in um, uh, kind of creating in partnership with organizations this type of programs. What do you do upon return? With one of my audits, we actually had a lot of issues like when actually people leave, either if it's maternity or a long-term sick leave, the teams are being put under a lot of pressure uh, because the workforce planning was not done correctly and there's no backup and everything. So then when the person returns, everybody feels a bit unconscious probably, or like, oh, because you left, all these things are on us. So this is also a bit of a motherhood penalty when people return. So the workforce planning is as important as the program to return. But I think we can do a whole session on this. To be honest, I think there are, first of all, parts of being compliant and making sure you keep the role as it is. If that's the contract that you signed with the person, keeping the pay. Some people don't get their pay raises while they are away, which is a problem. So keeping, again, this is legal stuff, at least in Europe. And then there are also this part of like reintegration. You need to reintegrate the person in any kind of
Yes.
program, even if they've been away for like 2 months or 1 year. I think you kind of need to look at what is that. You give them a body. There is a certain buffer time. There are certain initiatives, and I think big organizations do this well because they just have more mothers, to be honest, that have a bigger voice, and then smaller organization with younger populations, they kind of wing it, and that's a problem.
I would encourage everyone here because I've recently read something on Reddit about an individual, and I know cases myself live, which is scary and extremely sad, of individuals, of mothers who had nothing to go back to or went back and they were fired they went back without any pre-communication whatsoever. So I would encourage every one of us to first of all understand the law, because each country, we all live in different parts of the world, and we will have our own different laws. But it was shocking for me that in that case that I read on Reddit, people were redirecting this individual to the law and they were completely unaware. And I think this is on us. As much as I would love to put a lot of things on the company, a lot of it is also on us to take accountability and be responsible for understanding the situation that we are in and our own rights, so that we know what we can ask for,
Yep.
right? Yeah, and of course we are at time, right? And of course I cannot ask you some about innovative ways in which organizations can measure diversity in hiring and retention, beyond the basic demographic. But if you want to share.
Promotion ratios and promotion speeds are very good to look at. It tells a big story, and you do it, regularly. Most people have promotion cycles every 6 months, 1 year, so that tells you a story. I even with Wafer, we actually started before I left. We started doing some very cool stuff and actually taking demographic data from the census and starting to do basically a 5-year, 10-year plan, because also our now, for example, in Germany, there is all this conversation about migration, right? How do we deal with that? And I think that is a very interesting point. If you have a people analyst which has 1 hour a week, that's all you need, just to kind of see how do you mirror maybe a little bit the local reality versus your
Yes.
regional culture, right? So there will be some things, and of course I think there is a lot of conversation about, oh, but I cannot measure in Europe because GDPR, etc., etc. There are ways. You can do anonymized surveys, you can do non-anonymized surveys if you tell people exactly why you do it and keep the information for just a specific period of time, and etc. So there are ways you can measure demographics, you can measure inclusion, you can measure a lot of different things, but you need
Yes.
resources.
Yeah, you need resources for sure. You need money for sure. But honestly, sometimes you also just need the intention and the willingness, right, to do certain things. I would have loved to touch a bit on belonging, because this is something which will be part of the event we will hold together in April. I think, for full disclosure, folks, there is a document that obviously we worked on, me and Wana, and we had so many questions, we had so many ideas. Obviously, things went like they went, but definitely, I truly hope that everybody had pens and paper, and if not, you were digital, not like me. I'm old school. So I got a lot of it. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking time, and thank you for sharing all of the knowledge that you shared. And yes, for folks who want to travel to Berlin, or who are in Berlin or not, on the 10th of April, yes, there is a full event. It's really interactive. One, I will be here together with two other really reputable individuals from the scene, from the space. So join the Talent Crunch LinkedIn for that, and you can check the event. And then join us in May in Barcelona. I'm
Barcelona.
so in. We even have discounts from you, so thank you so much for that. I kept pushing them out. Yes, we got discounts for folks coming from the Talent Crunch community for the event, so that we can bring the community and your community together.
We will do it. I think the European community is coming closer and closer, especially those who are in. I think not to make it political, and we need to wrap it up, but the coalition of the willing. So just work with
Mm-hmm.
those like Eva, Rina, Roslyn, all these people who have joined Acacia. We have a couple of questions. We will respond asynchronous on the event. Jan, I think again, these people here are gonna do great things. It's just like we just need to have the fuel and not burn out. Please, people, do not burn out. You're more important if you can keep a steady ship and push for this,
Yeah.
knowledge acquiring and actions.
Wonderful. This is great. Thank you. I'm very happy it stays online. So
Yes.
thank you for helping with the tech facilitation this time. And thank you everyone for joining. I can't wait to look at the comments. I didn't have access to them because I'm not a tech. And I will see you all soon.
Yes. Ciao, everyone.
Thanks.